Well, good morning, Vanessa. It's glad to have you on the show today. I'm all excited about this topic that we're going to talk about, and so welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony.
Your background is quite fascinating. I've got to take a look at some of your history and the stuff that you've done. You have this a great plethora of knowledge, right? So you kind of the work that you do with the alumni with Harvard alumni, it's quite fascinating. May I take me back a little bit and introduce me to your path?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was younger, and we're going to go way back. So when I was younger, I wanted to become an astronaut. And so it was a desire I harbored for many years. But unlike most kids who let go of that dream at, say, 12, I only let go of that dream when I was 21. So I was inspired by the time I was 14, and I actually got picked to be part of this NASA delegation to go to the what was then the former USSR. And it was we were led by an astronaut. We were going to Star City, their equivalent of mission control in Moscow, and we got to meet cosmonauts. Also got to meet other students our ages, so at who were like around the beginning of high school, and it just really like imprinted in me the ability for sciences to bring people together and to surpass differences. And I thought that that was incredibly powerful, and I was also very much inherently interested in the science itself of just like thinking about astrophysics. And I started going into science research, and so I worked in labs starting from the time I was 15, and actually in neuroscience labs. And by the time I got to Harvard, I was still working in labs, and I thought I was going to be a scientist so that I could go into space one day. And it was only like around my senior year when I realized, like, wow, I've been working in labs at that time already 4 or 5 years. And I just thought, well, seeing what I've done, I've made a small contribution. Is that going to be what it's like down the road? It just felt like I didn't have the patience to just make a small impact. And so I started thinking about and meandering around other areas. And I was also interested in many, many different areas. I was really interested in politics. I was really interested also in volunteering. I was volunteering in a nursing home at that time while doing Alzheimer's research. And so I started thinking that I wanted to do other things that would have more of an immediate impact. So I studied the War Crimes Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia after college with a Fulbright fellowship.
Oh,
And then I also realized much more quickly than with the sciences that you know dealing with things after the fact was a little bit harder to swallow. I just felt like I wanted to solve problems even before they happened. So I went into business instead. I deferred law school between my 1L and 2L year. So I did my 1L year, told them I'm going to work now for McKinsey, the management consulting firm, see what that's like, and then come back. And that was when I fell into media and innovation. So I ended up staying at McKinsey for about 10 years, helping media clients launch new businesses. And innovation was what I realized was the common thread of everything I've ever done. If I think about the sciences and how that's really about pushing innovation, so is being in technology. And I've been in technology ever since. Ended up staying at McKinsey for 10 years in the Dutch offices and the UK offices, and then in New York. And then I decided to come out and start businesses myself. So I joined up with a business partner. We formed a venture startup studio. We could talk about what that is. We started two businesses, one in the media space and the other one in the commerce space. And first business we sold, the second company is now a Series C venture backed company. And then I went over to SAP and oversaw SAP's early stage accelerators. SAP is a large enterprise software company. And then I left last year to start a third company now in the HR tech space and dedicated towards helping companies create arrangements so they could hold on to their older workforce.
Certainly a well-decorated background. The steps you look at as you've gone through this transition, right? To learn how to look at things through sciences, right? To be able to look at the analysis, the analytical side of that, and really get a look at, all right, great, this is how it got to where it is. But now to start to look at and go, all right, how do we start to create where it's going, right? To get
Mhm.
on the entrepreneur side and really start to look at creating that venture, and the knowledge of how it got there is great, right? And taking that, but now as you start to develop really what's going to propel it forward. And I think one of the things I saw about your background that I really love the most is the work you're doing today that's really starting to address an issue that's coming up very quickly, right? This baby boomer population that's really advancing, right? I think I saw one of the statistics that says that in 2020 was the first time we had more people over 65 than people that were, under, under five. And that population is going to continue to grow every year. And that difference is really changing. And how do we capture all of that knowledge that those baby boomers collected, right? All this knowledge is going to die off with their expertise, and really more than that, their wisdom, right? That's the part
Right.
that's the most impactful. Maybe the parts and pieces have changed, but that wisdom piece is the part to try to capture. So as you start to put together this business that looks at addressing that, how do you come up with that?
Yeah. So I've been interested in aging and longevity for a very long time. Actually started when I was in college, when I was volunteering in the nursing home and I was doing Alzheimer's research. I saw firsthand how societally we were set up in a way to hide people who are getting older.
Mm,
It's not like in other cultures where it's very much integrated. You see intergenerational communities all around you. I think like in this country over the last few decades, there's been the whole entire move towards, oh, if you're older, you will retire, you're going to go off into the sunset and be hidden from society. And I remember starting to think about that. I was like, that is really odd because I know I never want to do that with my parents. And maybe growing up in an Asian household where you have this intergenerational community around you. I lived growing up with my two grandmothers in our household, and so that was something that for me was just very normal.
right.
And I think in many other cultures too, it's like that. And then fast forward to about like 10 years ago when I was starting these businesses with my business partner in this venture startup studio. We were launching media properties focused on different, what we called Class A demographics. So the first business we started was focused on men 30 to 55. And I remember we were going to our investors and saying, like, look, the baby boomer demographic is completely underserved. And we were saying a lot of the stats that you just started talking about, like if you project forwards to 2060, the number of people over 65 is going to double by then. And and there are 10,000 people reaching what we deem retirement age of 65 every single day. And if you think about health spans and lifespans enabling us to live much more fulfilling lives to like our 80s and 90s, what is that going to look like? And we made the pitch to investors. They're like, okay, go, you should go and start it. But what we found was that there were many advertisers who basically said, well, this demographic we get for free anyway. They all whenever we go on TV and we advertise, we get the 50 plus demographic for free because they're set in their ways and they're not going to be around for long. That's those are the answers that we got. So we decided not to launch the business. And I just thought there has to be a way to change what people think about this demographic and also realize the opportunity here. If you look at Japan, which has had an aging society for far longer, and you look at what they've done, like how if you go to retailers, it's not just like one tiny section dedicated to people who have mobility needs. They're actually aisles and aisles, just like we have the equivalent when it comes to babies. And I think it's just more a question of this tide shift that's going to happen. That's really made me think that not only will there be a lot of business opportunities, but just societally, I think we need to think about this and think about how we need to embrace the fact that many of us might be working well into our 80s so that we can financially support the fact that we are living longer lives.
I mean, without a doubt, we have, when I was born, men were expected to live to 65, and maybe women were 68. Today, I mean,
Right.
that demographic it's dramatically changed. I mean, like you said, medical advances are really creating it, and I can see that. I'm 5 years away from 65. I don't know that I want to retire. My wife and I look at each other and go,
Yeah.
what are we going to do? I mean, I love
Right.
being a creator. I love the creative energy that I get from work. The places where I really get some significance out of creating stuff with people, right? Today I'm not the warrior that I was when I was younger and I fly 100,000 miles a year, but
Mhm.
today I can guide big groups of people. And, like the household you talk about, right? I think one of the things that
Right.
missing in this society is having that string of wisdom from the elder parent. We have my mother was Italian and my wife's mother's Greek, and they spend lots of time here in our home,
Lots of time together.
right?
Yeah.
They're in our homes for months and months and months at a time throughout the year, and every once in a while they'll go back to Greece, or
Mhm.
mother just passed away, but she
Mm.
we spent lots of time together, and there was something about having that history in our home that gave
Right.
us a little bit of a string. There was a calmness to it. Now there was this wisdom that you got from them, and the younger part of our families, the interaction between them. There was something that was really fulfilling, and I find like that's the same thing that happens in the workplace. Today
Right.
we bring on these amazing young people. I mean, look, we have some of the greatest young minds coming to work at our company. I mean, they're amazing. These minds are quick, but they're also going so fast that they're missing that piece of wisdom that the elderly. All right, look, let's learn to walk instead of run all day. Let's find a way to think instead of react. The wisdom part of business that takes place, and I think you're right on when you start to look at it and go, all right, how do we embody and embrace and support that next really growth segment?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Like, and I think there's, if you think about life expectancy of kids born today, it's actually 100. Like they are going to live very, very long lives on average. And that means that they have to think about the ebbs and flows of a career. They're probably going to be working for 60 years at least of their lives. And if you think about it that way, how do you prepare for society that way? And also, how do you have this apprentice type of relationship, like what you were saying, like with your grandmothers or your elderly parents, and they're passing things on to the next generation. I was really inspired by actually the editor in chief that we were going to bring in for that baby boomer digital property, media property that we were going to launch, was a New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who happened to be my business partner's stepdad. And he had retired. And he was talking about how there were so many people like him, all of his friends, who were in their 70s, incredibly fulfilling careers and just so smart, and how he just felt like it was a waste that they were just, I mean, they were retired, they're like, what can we do with our wisdom? So he started a nonprofit dedicated to helping nonprofits with this type of skill base. And he basically would call on friends and say, hey, there's someone here who needs communication, somebody here who needs like board help. And so he created a cadre of people like that. And if you think about that type of solution, but you multiply it outwards, how much better off our society would be.
No, there's for sure having that all in. Everybody has a spot on in the community, right? There's something there that's fulfilling about it, right? Not just go setting out to pasture. First of all, I can't imagine I ever want to get sent out to pasture, right? When I look at life and go, look, I'm not looking for that. I've had an amazing life, an amazing career, and I can just imagine someday that the young folks in my family and the young folks in the businesses that I own will continue to grow, and they'll be more valuable. Or maybe I don't need the day-to-day activity, right? That part of me that
Mhm,
says, look, I don't have to do anything, but I want to do stuff where I love to do it. Like for me, I love spending time with our young, the new employees, right? Just getting
mhm,
in there and looking at their day. They're so what I've noticed about for me, and one of the things I notice about our society is that there's so much stuff going on.
yeah.
Just this last couple of weeks, I've really come to this realization that, if you look at, I spent 4 hours last week trying to get a password to work. Right? Have you ever been in that trap where you go, I try to go log on to one thing and it
Yeah.
keeps sending the verification password to an email that I can't get into?
Yes.
Have you done that?
Yes.
Right. So here, I realized while I was doing it, it was about 4 hours worth of
Ugh.
Apple love, right? I was trying to get in there. I was like, I'm like, I trying to find another way to do it. And can you send this to me in another format? And they're like, no, so it took 4 hours. And I realized in that moment that didn't exist 10 years ago. I
Mm.
heard that whole process, and the number of applications that we use on a day-to-day basis in the businesses that I run, right? The number, the softwares that run my one construction company, there's probably a dozen of them. Now,
Yeah.
look, those are all amazing. Right? Look, they're all going to be amazing, but this transition from where we were analytically to where we were digitally, right?
Mhm.
It takes up a lot of time to make this transition. Now, what's happening though, what I notice is that the young people that we're working with, they're powerful and they're making all these great stuff, but what they're getting lost in is them, right? The
Yeah.
part of them that needs to take care of them, the part of them that let's just stay focused on what we really want to get done today and not get caught up in all of this change that's happening. And in that is where I'm able to give some wisdom, like, okay, look, we're going to get into that, right? We're going to be able to move and do those softwares, but today I just need to make sure that the lights go on, right?
That's right.
I just need to make sure that the next step that project that we're working on, they need the air conditioning there by noon today, or 10 people are going to sit there. And we could get caught up in all these new things that are happening. But sometimes you get caught in the weeds and you can't see, the forest through the trees, right? You can't see it. And the wisdom I can bring to it is, hey, look, I promise you, I've been on these projects where we forget to do that. And now 10
Mhm.
people miss that day. And now
Mhm.
it's going to affect what happens everywhere. So the wisdom of knowing how big of a net to cast during the period of time that we're in, there's where all this transition's happening, but just don't forget to do what needs to get done now and
Right.
seeing that, right? And I think in there becomes this that piece of how do I transition that, right? So I think as you start to look at the software that you're creating, the new company that you're doing, I think it's amazing to see that Sugarworks now starts to answer this. So talk to me about how do you come up with Sugarworks?
Okay, so I mean, the name Sugarwork, the way it came about was I was thinking about how work is so fulfilling. It should be something that you continue to look forward to, and especially if you wanted to be about flexibility down the road. So I started thinking about what I enjoy, what I look forward to. So I look forward to desserts, and but dessert work doesn't necessarily roll off the tongue. And I just thought, well, sugar work should be that something that you look forward to doing in terms of how you can shape what work is like. And the way that the business idea came about was when I was leaving SAP, I was talking to our head of HR, who was I was explaining to him my desire to build a new business in an area around longevity and aging. He said, "Well, what our issue is here at SAP is that in the next 3 to 5 years, like many other companies who have a workforce that's in their late 40s, we're going to have an exodus of people if we don't do something about it. These are people who've always expected to leave at least our company at 55 and then do other things. But it's not like before where there was a big bench to pull from. And so they started saying, like, how about if we were to entice these people to stay? We know that they don't want to work with us full time for forever. But if we can craft a way so that they continue working here while doing other things, wouldn't that be a win-win for everyone? So we started talking a lot about that, about what is necessary to make that happen. The thing is, many companies, could have these one-on-one conversations with people, but you just don't have enough HR teams. Like, your HR team is just not large enough to support that. And also, a lot of people who are on the employee side are reluctant to say anything. Like, if they're worried that if they were to say, like, oh, I'm going to, if I want to work less, if I tell my boss that, they might just make me move on the spot. And so it's a catch 22. And I started doing a lot of interviews with CEOs and CHROs after I had this conversation with our head of HR, and realized that in many other companies, they were facing the same issue, that they would like to hold on to their workforce. They'd like to offer something flexible, but they've never done that before. Most companies think about one person as one FTE. So, what can you do when it comes to flexibility arrangements? Do they need to scope out roles differently? And and I started realizing this is something that is just across the board. It's not just for people in the pre-retirement stage. It's also people who might be younger and want to come back to the workplace and on ramp effectively, not go from 0 to 100 after they've been out for caregiving leave, for instance, or parental leave. And and of course, the pandemic has enabled us to realize that you could work quite efficiently remotely, and flexibility is what people desire. So I actually think this is part of a much broader trend when it comes to flexibility, that companies, the winning companies of tomorrow, are those who figured out how to, you know, manage the ebbs and flows that their employees have in their lives so that they can keep that talent. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to enable companies to offer flexible arrangements at scale, and then also manage that knowledge from one person to the next.
That's interesting. Capturing, so giving them the ability to be flexible, right? And going, all right, look, if you want to work 10 hours or 20 hours or whatever that arrangement becomes, right? Now, talk to me a little bit about how does that get executed on?
So, a lot of it is just understanding what are the flexibility goals of a person. So, which days of the week do you want to work? How many hours? So, to say that you want to work 60%, that could come in many different flavors. But if you can actually capture the specifics around that, and then you as an employer can say, well, I know with that role that Anthony is doing, I would be willing to craft an 80% version, a 60% version, a 50% version, and this is what it's going to look like. You can then match that on the back end. So instead of going back and forth with many, many conversations between an employee and their manager or an HR business partner, this is something that the platform would capture and do the matching. So that's one thing that we would do from an execution point of view. And then secondly, after that person has said, well, I'd like to go to 50% starting from this day, let me get approval for this role, that person would also be prompted to say, well, we would also like you to make sure your knowledge is transferred to people around you. So the person who's going to start doing that 50%, or those people will be doing parts of the 50% that you're leaving behind, let's make sure that they're just as good as you are in X, Y, and Z. So they will be surfaced, essentially what we're calling proteges, for them to be matched with, so that they would meet with them regularly over a period of time, over a number of sessions, where that tacit knowledge, which is really hard to just jot down on paper, is transferred. We're talking about meeting people side by side, job shadowing, doing, what in the past has been true apprenticeship, and really learning that way, so the expert is transferring that knowledge to the protege.
It's fascinating. I think that that's one of the things that it's really fulfilling, right?
Mhm.
As you take the knowledge you've gained in life, and I have often said you don't have it until somebody else gets that you get it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, all the stuff that you've captured, great, keep it all in your head, and I'm not sure how valuable that becomes, other than maybe you can execute on your job. But now to really, really be able to share that, right? That abundance. And I think, as we get older, we start to really notice in our younger years, there's a little bit of self-centeredness. And as we get to middle, and we start to help grow a company, and it's we do this company. And then that part about really giving away. And there's something really fulfilling about being part of supporting others, right? In a way that's really
Mhm.
generous and abundant. And it's the feedback on that really becomes, it's like a multiplier, right? There's in the
That's
joy
right.
realm, right? As I get to work with others and go and watch them be successful, and really support them, and know that, great, there's my contribution to life, right? That somewhere in there that I'm really able to work with them in a way that I see their success, and it's measurable, and I can put that, and also make that so it continues, right? As that
Right.
person's there, or the next person's there, I'm able to continue to capture that knowledge. So now, as you guys start to execute that, and as you bring people on, how do you see this going enterprise wise?
So enterprise-wise, like we've been talking to companies, and large companies, like we're talking about the 10,000 person and above types of companies, as well as smaller ones that are 500 to 10,000. And what we're seeing is that we're looking at it by function. So manufacturing roles and sales roles are where this is most needed at
Sure.
the get-go. I mean, this is where, if you think about manufacturing, right? And you've of course like been in the manufacturing construction realm, and where you could see that, oh, there's been an aging in the workforce, and a lot of this knowledge is not getting transferred. And if anything, these companies are saying, well, we'd like to hire people, we just can't. Like, we hear of companies putting out huge referral bonuses, huge benefits, but they just don't get the people in. And so for them, they're definitely afraid of losing those folks that they still have remaining. There was this one company I spoke with who was talking about how they have tool makers for their medical device company, who are 75 and above, and how losing them would be just so detrimental. I mean that factories would close. And so if you think about those types of companies and those types of roles where it's most needed, it is about offering a solution. So it could be a benefit to employees to say, hey, if you want to stay, because I think so many people derive, purpose. They derive satisfaction from working. That's what we're going to try to do. So we're aiming for those companies that have those types of roles where this could be of benefit. And it's across many different industries. So our first customers are in manufacturing, they are in healthcare, and they are all very, very focused on retaining their talent.
It's interesting in that it's changing the way the workflow happens, right? To
Yeah.
start to be able to do this, and I see this happening with all the technologies that are coming in, right? If you look at artificial intelligence, if you look at robotics, if you look at machine learning, all across all of the platforms that I interview and look at, what happens is we start to notice that, okay, if we're going to start to execute on this, I've got to start to look at the workflow a little bit different, right? So I don't set this up. I don't go in there and set this up day one and all of a sudden it goes. I need to be able to, kind of go back a little bit and look at the roles and responsibilities of the job. Right. And as I
Right.
start to take those roles and responsibilities, talk to me a little bit about how do you set that up, right? As you start to look at, the tool maker's role and responsibility, go, all right, if I'm going to go get this person to 50% or a derivative of their current work level, what am I, how am I, how do I start that? What's the
Yeah.
thought process?
Yeah. Like shaping that role so that there could be a 50%. So we've been looking at jobs in many different ways. So there are shift-based roles, which like this tool maker would fit into a shift-based role. Like somebody needs to be on the floor during certain hours and has to be somebody who has that knowledge. And so with a shift-based type of fractionalization, what you want to do is to make sure that there are people who are equally skilled who could take over those parts, those shifts that are not going to be done anymore. So that is very much like, let's see if over time these people who have been maybe coming up the business, can they take over more and more of those types of roles? So that's one way of doing it with shifts. So this is about like reskilling people or upskilling people. We've also been talking to some companies who've been saying like, look, we know we don't have enough bench strength. We even want to do a partnership with a local technical college. I'm like, well, that is an incredible perk. If you can say that you can be an apprentice to somebody who's been doing this for decades and decades, isn't that the best way of learning? And so we've been thinking about that too. Most people, it's not that they don't want to share their knowledge, it's because it's not baked into the job.
Right.
So if it comes out of their hide where I'm like, I have to do this after hours, and that's not fair. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to bake it in so it is part of the job to share what your knowledge is. So the shift-based worker, that's very clear. If we think about capacity driven types of roles like salespeople, it's based on volume. How many customers can you service at a given time? And it might be that, well, this person has been working on on a sales book of 20 customers. We're going to bring that down to 10. Those other 10 customers, it's about making sure you can hand off those relationships well. And you have to do that slowly. You have to make sure that the people who are taking over the accounts know the ins and outs of that particular customer situation. That's not something that you can just say like, here, like read this report and you'll get to know it. It's about really understanding the idiosyncrasies of that particular company or those particular people that you're working with at your customers. And that, a lot of it is just about being able to be with somebody so you could develop that relationship. So that's part of what it is that we're doing too. So this is very much like looking at outcomes And how do you create roles by outcome? I think so much of the time there's been a focus on hiring people just based on skills. But here, let's talk about outcomes. Like we always talk about how salespeople, they might have, your book of 20 customers that they're cultivating. They probably have like another book of 10 customers that they're actively cultivating that they haven't brought in yet. And they probably then spend a bulk of their time also managing teams. So if you split that up, it's probably 60% managing current customers, 20% trying to go after new customers, 20% after managing people. So if you want to create a 60% role, you can say, let's just focus you on, just those customers that you have, those customers you've been cultivating, you can hand those off, and your managerial responsibilities, you can hand those off. Or if that person is an incredible manager, you could basically say, let's keep you on to be a manager. You only need to do a small book of business, and then that's what the bulk of your role is like. So it's that type of thinking that what we're finding is that like a lot of big companies need a little bit of support in that, because they just haven't had the bandwidth to think about jobs on an outcomes basis and to be able to fractionalize in that way.
Well, I also see that a lot of, let's just use salespeople, for example. You
Yep.
know, in a manufacturing company, the thing is that the salespeople become these, they become these masters of figuring out the system to serve the
Mhm.
customer, right? So they take their historical knowledge about the company, right? Well, if I put an order in today, standard work times are 4 to 6 weeks. The customer's like, I can't do that in 4 to 6 weeks, and there's, the salesperson then goes, well, okay, they know the system. So they figure out how to do a workaround and how to get that thing in to serve the customer. And the part of that that's hard to understand is how to do that in a way that doesn't piss off the whole system. And that
Right,
with a little bit of a nuance. Now, at the same
right,
time, it also has to have the company change, right? The company has to be able to look at it and go, look, if I keep it so it's just this little secret little dance that they do, they jump up and down with a couple chickens and they do the secret dance and they get that to work. That's not going to work for as we continue to grow. And I look at
right,
my own organizations and see how, we've had, those secret moves that people do to make something happen, and they work, but that's not a sustainable long-term growth model, right? For us
right,
to really, really work, we've got to find the ways to make that support for the client that took secrecy to figure out and move that into a place where it becomes a system that's easier to operate, right? So it's transparent and it's easy to see, and it takes the voodoo out of it. And there's where I think that the systems like this start to be able to capture that and go, okay, look, if that customer needs that in under 2 weeks, here's a system by which we can do that, and here's how we've now made a workaround that isn't really work now. It's just another workflow, another process that goes in. All right, when that happens, when we need to make that happen, here's what we're going to need to do to make that work. And some of it might be all right, let's just notice that we're doing that because we're not contacting the customer in a timely fashion. Maybe it's,
right.
because I forget to call them every 2 weeks and follow up on an order. That by the time I get to the order, now it's a crisis. Now I might find a ways to start to look at the flow that I'm doing a little bit different. That will either mitigate some of the tap dancing and working around. You're right. That's kind of the first goal, is to kind of get us so that we're not in that special circumstance all the time. We can get this into a standardized workflow or standardized process. And then the next part is when we do have to go to a special process because of customers' needs. Here's how we can do that in a way that doesn't affect, or it doesn't throw off the rest of the system that we're operating in. And I think those are places where it really becomes great when we look at these kind of softwares. When you guys start to look at this and go, all right, look, I'm going to take it out of their head and I'm going to start to put it into a process that the next person can follow, or the person that's got the other side of this role can do, and they can take on those 5 customers in a way that will support them just as good as Betty did before she handed off the 5 projects. She can, that Bob can now handle those next 5 and do it just as well. And the customer doesn't feel a drop in support, doesn't feel a drop in that. And um, it makes it more transparent. It makes it more consistent. It gives it a much clearer ability to make it reproducible.
Yeah, yeah. I think scalability, just your point to making sure that there are processes that are scalable. And so much of the time, they're individuals who have been like the only point of contact on X, Y, and Z. So they've come up with their way of doing it. And that's not necessarily a scalable process, right? And so part of wisdom transfer also involves, well, let's look at how things have been done. Can we optimize it? And that's the benefit of having people who are coming in with fresh eyes, who can just think about, wow, that person has done this so incredibly well. Are there other ways where we can address this and optimize it? And so that's something that's also very beneficial from having a knowledge transfer process. It should be two ways.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. That whole as we evolve, um, the fresh pair of eyes syndrome is great because, and I noticed myself, right, as I brought in, I went from being the president of CDO Group to being the founder, and we brought in
Mhm,
another president, and she runs the company way better than I ever did. And it
mhm,
it pushed a lot of buttons for it. There was a lot of my significance tied up in how I did things, and then
yeah,
all of a sudden, as I moved over, and I said, okay. We're evolving as a company. We need the skill set that she has to operate this company to go to the next level that we are today. What are we going to be able to, how am I going to do that? So having some grace for the person that's in the role as the transition happens. And
mhm,
then, the company started looking at me going, oh, well, Anthony kind of led the company for 24 years. We're not going to send him out to pasture. But now what's the part of Anthony that's really, really valuable? And for me, it's around, relationships with employees, training, carrying the flag, doing all that kind of stuff. And now that's become my greatest gift. Right now, I get to go out with spend time with new employees that we hire and bring them on and really celebrate them for who they are. And that's a mastery that, something that came with time, right? Being able to celebrate the new employees that come into the company and help them really, take foot and feel part of a system. And you know, there's if as I would join your company, as I would join, bringing you guys on, that's where the celebration would happen with me. Is what's the steps I take when I do that, right? How do I transfer
right.
that knowledge to the next person that does this? So talk to me about some of the places where you've done this run, you've run these scenarios before.
So we are, we're so new. We just started the business, but we are doing this now with a medical device company. We are doing this with also a senior living community slash health institution, and we're also in publishing as well. And across the board, like what we're finding is that, and this notion of holding on to people is incredibly important. And it's not just for those that are in the pre-retirement sector, it's also across the board. Like the companies that we're working with are realizing, well, this could be a benefit for everybody who's at the company. We'd like to be able to extend this to say, oh, if you are an incredible talent, we'd like to be able to retain you in some way, even when you're thinking about transitions. And hopefully you can remain a part of the company while you do that. It's very forward thinking, and it makes me think so much about how, companies of tomorrow are going to embrace this. And also it even goes down to succession management, of course, and and attrition management. There are companies nowadays that we're talking to who, of course, are falling on times which are tougher, and so they are looking at ways of course rationalizing. And in the past this would be all layoffs, but what if you can say, well, instead of layoffs for those parts of the business that we know are not doing as well, maybe what we can do is help people transition by giving them flexible arrangements instead. And so thinking about things from that capacity lens is also something new that a lot of companies are experimenting with. But I think flexibility is really here to stay. If you look at these large accounting firms like the Ernst and Youngs and Accentures of the world, right? Already 10% of their workforce are based on contractor and contingent labor. That's projected to grow to one third. These companies are like 300,000 strong. And so if you look at it from that perspective, how professional services are usually at the forefront of these types of changes, if you think about your manufacturing company, your CPG companies, your software technology companies, all healthcare, all across the board, what if we can flex people just like we're thinking about flex when it comes to spaces, and why, companies like the WeWorks of the world have done very well over the last years, and especially now post pandemic, is because you can offer flexibility.
Well, I would say that, I when I was younger, I thought of retirement as, you're gonna go to Florida and you're gonna go down there
Yeah.
and you'll wake up in the morning and maybe go have coffee with my friends at McDonald's, and then maybe I'll go over and we'll play shuffleboard or something. But that's not how I see my friend and I are not looking at retirement that way. We're looking at, all right, how do we, we'd like to travel to different countries. We'd like to spend 3 months originally we were talking about RVing. And just this
Right.
couple of years, we're like, well, maybe instead of traveling and moving an RV around, maybe we would just go take up residence somewhere for 3 months. Go to
Right.
Portugal for 3 months, and maybe go to
Right.
just try on different places. And we don't have to do it full time. We can kind of get a habit of moving, because today I feel like my retirement isn't the same retirement as my parents, right? And
Mhm.
having a way to continue to have some income, right? Maybe it's not full time income to help support
Mhm.
some of that, because look, we're much more creative retirements than ever before. The
Right.
cup of coffee and shuffleboarding, that was one way to retire. Today, going to Portugal for 3 months and being able to look at, I can, try that on and run a cars and check out that country. It's going to be a little
Right.
bit different, maybe a little bit more expensive, and having the ability to bring in some cash flow, isn't such a bad idea. And it's, in fact, it feels nicer to know that I've got a little bit of cash flow supporting that on.
Right.
So I think there's some magic in what you're doing, and especially as this population is getting ready to double, the path that you're going on is wonderful. And I praise you for the work you're doing. It's innovative and it's needed, and it's great as it progresses. I would love to have you on again and again and again, and just really celebrate where you're going with it and the breakthroughs that you're seeing with, I often say that we can't see today at the start of the company that you're creating where it's going to end up, right? Just
Yeah.
this path of where they go are never seen. But as you keep breaking through breakthroughs, Vanessa, I would love to have you on again, and keep talking about what you're doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, because we were just, as I said, new in our journey. We only just went public with what we were doing this month. And so please, let's continue the conversation. For anybody who would like to find out more, you could come and visit our website.
Well, if you guys liked the conversation that Vanessa and I had, please take a second and like and subscribe. It means the world to us, right? Just take a second and share this with your friends. It really goes a long way to know we're hitting it. If you have any questions or comments, please put them down below. We'll get back to you and make sure we answer all of those as we can. As always, we're grateful for the listeners that jump on here. And Vanessa, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best place for them to get a hold of you?
Yep, you could find me on LinkedIn. And so I'm Vanessa Liu, Liu is my last name. Sugarwork is www.sugarwork.com.
Thank you very much for being on here. Loved the conversation. Very interesting. And we'll have you on again. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anthony.
Thanks for joining us. My name is Anthony Amunategui, always looking for people to bring insight into the industry, finding ways to inspire people to have amazing careers in the development world. If you liked our podcast, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. If you really liked our podcast, make sure you hit the little bell. Thanks again for listening. Please share it with your friends.